Drawing a color-changing chameleon is easier than you think, and I'm going to show you exactly how you can do it, no matter your skill level. Hey hello wonderful people, it's Genevieve, and my goal here on this channel is to teach you all about illustration and design. So if you're new, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss any of the weekly videos, and so that you can join our wonderful creative community. And with that said, grab your drawing tools, and let's get started. So as usual, the first thing we're going to do is create a new canvas so we have somewhere to draw. Now for reference, these are the dimensions of the canvas I will be using in this video. It is, as usual, just the size of my iPad screen because this is the demo, but make sure you use dimensions that work for your own project requirements. Now if you're not exactly sure how to pick a canvas size, I have a video in which I teach you everything you need to know in order to make a decision, so I will link that in the description below. One thing I do want to mention for this video though is that if you want to have the animation at the end and you want to be able to export it, make sure that your file is not too large, otherwise you might have issues with that. So probably staying below 3000 pixel as your maximum dimension. And if you want to have my illustration as your reference, you can do that by opening the wrench icon menu here at the top. In the canvas submenu, activating the reference toggle, which is going to let you import an image. So if you want to download my illustration as well as the color palette that we're going to use in the video, they're both totally free and they're going to be linked in the description below. And we're going to start with a super simple sketch with just basic shapes. So for that, you can use any color of your choice because we're not going to see this rough sketch in the final result. I like to just sketch with a neutral gray. So you can go ahead and create a new layer. Rename this layer to sketch. And in this video, I'm always going to be suggesting two different kind of brushes. One is going to be a free brush that comes with Procreate. It's going to allow you to follow along, no problems there. So you can just, use free brushes, that's totally okay. And I'm also going to be suggesting brushes from my Ultimate Illustration bundle. Now these brushes are not essential, don't worry, you don't have to buy anything to follow this video, but they can help you save some time and just get more professional results overall because they have a bit more sensitivity and textures included in them. So if you want to check them out, they will be linked in the description below with a special promo code for the YouTube people, but again, don't worry, you really don't need anything special. You're always going to have two different options at least. Especially for the sketch, since we're not going to see it in the final result, just make sure you pick a brush that you know you're comfortable with. That could be, for example, in the sketching panel, so the brushes that come with Procreate, the HB pencil. Or if you do have my illustration bundle, in the texture part of the bundle, picking the sketching brush. Now this character might seem a bit intimidating because there's a lot going on. So instead of saying, okay, we're going to start by drawing the head and then the back and the tail and trying to do it all in, one outline, we're just going to break it down in super basic shapes and then move those around as needed, refine the sketch, add color, shade. It's going to be fairly simple. So we're going to start with just a small circle for the head. And I say circle, but it really doesn't need to be perfect at all. Just roughly mapping out where it's going to be and the size of it. Right next to the head, we're going to have the body. So another slightly bigger circle. Then from there, we can go ahead and start adding the different legs. Now the positioning of them really only depends on what you want to do. I personally like to start by just sketching roughly a branch so that I have somewhere for my chameleon to be holding to. And then simply drawing the direction and the bend of the different arms. So really just a super simple line like this for now. We're going to also draw the one that is behind, making sure that the top and the bottom part of the arms, I guess, are the same length on both sides. And then for the back, I'm going to want to have my chameleon kind of reaching forward with the back leg, so I'm just going to have it bent like this and kind of in the air, so not touching the branch. And the other one is going to be holding onto the branch. So you can see, it looks crazy right now, but that's fine. We're just mapping out where everything is going to be. Now at this stage, you might want to kind of refine the belly a little bit to have a better idea. So instead of having kind of this circle, just refining it so it's flat. And by drawing that, you can just continue this line and add a tail. And at this stage, it's totally fine if you realize that your sketch is too low and you don't have enough room or it's too big or something like that. At any point, you can use the arrow tool here at the top to reposition your sketch. And if you need to resize it, make sure that it is set to uniform here so that you can keep the same proportions while resizing it. So just going back to our line, then extending it and add kind of a spiral for the tail, making it a bit thicker. Then we can connect that with the back and extend our line until it connects with the head. So we can see we have just basic shapes, and then by refining those lines, we're starting to draw the actual chameleon. Now for the chameleon head, you have a bunch of different options. Some have this kind of thing on the head. I have no idea what it's called. I'm sorry about that. But kind of this crest thingy. So you could go ahead and draw it if you want. It's kind of like a big party hat or something like that. You can also refine the shape of the head if you want. You can keep it super round if you want a super cartoonish, cute chameleon. Otherwise, you can go in and add this S curve at the front. This one might be a little bit intense, but just refining the side of the head like this. Then all you have to do is connect this S curve to the belly, and that's it. So from just 2 circles, we now have a chameleon shape. We just have to refine a few things, including the facial features. So probably in the middle of your head circle, honestly, you can draw another pretty big circle, which is going to be the eye. And you might want to have the other eye peek a little bit on the other side of the head. You can also add some little dots for the nostrils. Maybe a mouth if you want, keeping it really close to the bottom of the head, but maybe adding a little flick at the top so you can see that your chameleon is smiling. And just before we draw the arms and the legs, we might want to flesh out the branch a little bit so that we know how to wrap the little toes and fingers. So fleshing out the branch, honestly, there's no right or wrong way to do it here. You can draw whatever shape you feel like, however thick, however thin. I'm gonna have mine be very thin because I want a chameleon to be the main element in my illustration. Now, one thing I would recommend though is try to not have super straight lines. Well, that's not crazy straight, but like don't go ahead and create a perfectly straight line for your branch. You do want it to have some kind of variation to make it look a little bit more natural. You can also have some tiny little sections poking out, again, just to make it feel a bit more interesting. And maybe adding some leaves as well at the ends of the branch. It doesn't need to be realistic in any way. We just want to make the piece feel a little bit more fun and less one chameleon in the middle of nothing. So now that we have the branch, we can go back and flesh out the legs and the arms. Pretty simple, honestly. I like to just draw ovals around the lines like this, which automatically, thickens the piece, and then you can connect the joint with just curved lines. And for the little fingers, you just want to make sure that they look like they're wrapped around the branch, but they're quite flexible. So what I'm going to do here is just have one kind of go over the branch here, and I know we have a bunch of lines. For now, that's totally okay. In the next step, we're going to clean this out. So for now, just draw a crazy line, and that's okay. But yeah, one finger that is wrapping around the branch on this side, so the opposite, we don't see it. And then 2 on the side of the branch facing us. For the other leg, same thing, just fleshing it out, or the other arm, sorry, just fleshing it out, then connecting the joint. And here I'm gonna have most of the fingers that we don't see, but this kind of thumb on our side. So same thing with the legs, just drawing ovals to flesh it out, and then just adding little toes very, very quickly. Finishing up with the very last leg. Maybe having a little toe kind of really wrap around the branch this time. And at this stage, it's okay if it looks messy. That's what we want, honestly. And the reason for that is that once you have basic shapes, it's really easy to move them around to change the proportions of your character if it's not exactly how you want it to be. For example, I feel like my head could be a little bit bigger. Now, since it's just a bunch of basic shapes, I can simply go ahead and use the selection tool here at the top, setting it to freehand, and then draw a selection around any basic shape, in my case, the head that I want to change. And then using the arrow tool, setting it to either uniform if I want to keep the proportions the same within that shape, or distort if I want to move them around. I can then just resize and reposition. I can even rotate if I need my basic shapes. So that's something you could not do, if we started straight up with drawing the colors and everything, you would have to get it right the first try, which is really hard. So when you're creating your own illustrations, it's always a good idea to just quickly map out where everything is going to be and then move that around, because it's going to save you so much time in the long run. You know, when you're starting to add the colors and the shadow, it becomes so much harder and time consuming to change stuff around. So just mapping out roughly everything first, it just takes a few minutes, but it helps you visualize everything. So take all the time you need here to just play with the different proportions of your rough sketch. And once you have a composition that you're happy with, it really doesn't need to be perfect, as you can see. We're going to move on to creating a clean sketch that we're also going to use as our outlines and details later. Now, doing the line art or outlines or details, however you want to call that, is going to be a whole lot of fun because we've already done most of the heavy lifting in terms of all the hard work. So now we're going to just create a new layer and rename this new layer to Details. You might want to go ahead and lower the opacity of your sketch until you can just barely see it, just so it doesn't get in the way too much. I'm going to keep mine a little bit more opaque so that you can really see it well in the video, but in your case, really lower it just as much as you can before it starts totally disappearing. And on your detail layer, you can pick honestly any color of your choice. It's going to be your outlines later. So you could go with a pure black if you want to have a very cartoonish look. I like to have my outlines and details just be a darker version of my character. So in that case, it would be a darker green. So if you're using the color palette, it's going to be this green right here. But as you can see, it's kind of a yellowish green that is quite dark. And in terms of brushes, you have a few different options depending on the vibe you want. If you want super clean cartoonish outlines, you could go in the inking panel picking the studio pen. That could work really well. Oh, you could also use in my brand new inking stippling texture bundle. I didn't want to mention two bundles, but if you have it, you could use the ultra smooth tracing as well. Otherwise, if you want to have more texture outlines, which is what I'm personally going to do, you could go in the sketching panel that comes with Procreate and pick the 6B pencil. Or if you have the illustration bundle, you could go and pick the outlines brush. So that might seem like a lot of options, but it really just depends on if you want super clean outlines or outlines with more texture, which I recommend texture for this illustration. It's just going to look better in the end. Now here, the size of the brush really depends on the canvas size that you're using, as well as the brush you're using. So just do a few strokes and test out until you find a size that you like for your own outlines. You know, there's really no right or wrong answer here. And then all you have to do is go back over your sketch and find which lines you're going to use. So we've drawn a bunch of different shapes, a bunch of different lines. Now is the time to go and clean that up and combining that step with creating our outlines. So sometimes in my videos, you know, we go ahead and we create a clean sketch and then later in the video we draw details. I feel like this one is a good practice for doing both the clean sketch as well as the outlines all at once, which is personally what I usually do when I draw illustrations. But if you're not super comfortable and if you're not used to creating a rough sketch, you could go and do the steps a couple times. So creating a cleaner sketch first, but still not perfect, and then creating a new layer and drawing your outlines on that layer, making sure that those outlines are super clean. So you could kind of go in stages here, but I would challenge you to try and just go from the rough sketch straight up to your outlines and details. So there's really no right or wrong way to do this here. It's all about experimentation, but you've probably heard me say that before. The one thing I would recommend is to try not to erase at this stage. You're much better to undo a line that you don't like and then retry than to erase. Now there are a few reasons for that, one of them being that it's just going to save you some time in the long run. Maybe not the first few times you do that, you're going to be so tempted to erase that it might be a little bit longer the first few times, but it's a really good habit to take and it's going to be much quicker over the long run to do that. But the main reason to avoid erasing and to undo instead is that your lines are going to be much more fluid that way, and your illustration is just going to flow so much better, and the result is going to be overall more professional and just more pleasing to the eye. So that's the one thing I'm going to say, but otherwise I'm going to stop talking here to let you focus on drawing your outlines. Take all the time you need. I'm going to keep my video going in the background. I'm going to speed it up, but you can use it as a reference. Otherwise, we're going to meet once we have fully drawn outlines and details. We're going to add the colors. I'm going to show you a few tricks to do that. Oh, and when I say outline everything, you can outline the branch as well. It doesn't have to be just a chameleon. You can stick with the same color. I'm going to show you how to recolor the outlines later in the video. Great! Once you have your outlines, you can go ahead and hide the sketch just to make sure that everything is there. And also at this stage, we can go ahead and add some details. Like you can see in my reference, I have little scales, I guess, on the back. So once you have your outlines, you can really have a lot of fun and just refine your piece however you want. If you want to draw the scales, it's just a bunch of tiny ovals following the direction of the back and the tail, making them smaller as you go, so they're quite big here. Well, quite big. They're a bit bigger at the top, but the closer you get towards the tail. And I also like to group them in groups of 1, 2, or 3. Well, 1 is not a group, but you get the idea. I also like to draw little ovals in groups of 3 this time, just on the top of the head and on the top of the back to show this idea of scales without having to draw them all. You can also add some simple lines on the belly just to make it a bit more fun and more detailed. And I did that in my outline step, but you can also add this kind of ridge above the eye just to give more structure to the face. Maybe continuing a little lines on the tail as well. Maybe adding veins in your leaves. I like to just draw the middle line of the leaf first and then adding a few angled lines on the sides. Now you could totally draw some leaves on the edges like I have in my example here. Just for the sake of time in this video, since we have all the animation to do later, I'm not going to, but it's the exact same shapes as these leaves. It's just that you would draw them towards the edges, so feel free to do that if you want, but yeah, I'm just going to focus on the chameleon here because we already have a whole lot to do. And the final little details we might want to add are on the branch. I personally like to add a few thin kind of spirals and just curvy lines to show the bark of the tree. Great, so now we'll move on to the colors, and that's going to be pretty easy because essentially at this point it's a coloring book. So we're going to go ahead and create a new layer, put it below the details, and rename it to, if I can do it, colors. And for the color, you can go with really whatever you want because we're going to have the chameleon change color later anyway. I'm going to go with just a light green. So since my outlines are dark green, I'm just going to pick that same one and make it quite a bit lighter. And here all we want to do is really just drawing a silhouette of our chameleon. And for that, you can really use any simple brush that doesn't have a whole lot of texture. So that could be in the airbrushing panel, the hard brush, making sure that you lift the opacity back up to 100% if you do watch my watercolor videos. Otherwise, if you have the illustration bundle, you could pick, where is it? There we go. We could pick the base round brush. And yeah, all you have to do is outline the chameleon so that you can then drop the color in and have a full-on silhouette. So it doesn't need to be pretty lines here. As long as you end up having a silhouette, that's totally okay. Now at this stage, you do want to make sure that you don't color in on the branch though. So really just the chameleon. The branch is going to be on a separate layer, and I'm going to tell you why in just a few seconds. And with that, it is time for the secret password. Now we're going to do it a little bit differently in this video. If you've watched this far, I have a question for you. It's not a secret password, it's a question. I want to know if you're thinking of doing the color animation as well, or if you're just going to keep your chameleon as one color. Now, if you're new on the channel, you might be like, what's the secret password? What is that even all about? It's a game that we play here on the channel. I usually hide one word somewhere in the video and it's for you guys to find. And when you find it, you just comment it below. Now that does a few things. It gives me a lot of insight into how to edit and pace my videos better, which helps me create better tutorials for you guys. So that's really cool. And it's also really great because you guys know me, you see my face in the intro, you hear my voice throughout the entire video, but I have no idea who you guys are. And whenever you leave a comment, whatever the comment is, sometimes I get to see your face, sometimes I get to see your name. And it's just so great to see who's part of the creative community that we're building here on the channel. So yeah, just leave me a comment telling me if you're thinking of doing the color animation at the end as well, and then we'll go to keep going. So once you have your outline, all you have to do is drag your color to fill it in and create a silhouette. Now you might need to adjust the threshold, and what I mean by that is once you drop your color, just hold your pencil on the screen and then move it from left to right until you find the moment right before it fills in the entire screen. If you have really neat outlines, you might be able to bring the threshold right up to the right. In that case, that's great. But yeah, you just want to make sure that it fills as much as the color or as much as the shape, I should say, as possible. And then feel free to go back in to fill in any missing details, like in my case, the scales on the back. Now we're going to add a lot of texture and color variation and shading to Chameleon, but before that we're going to draw the silhouette of the branch as well. So just creating a new layer, putting it below the colors, and this one we're going to rename it to branch. Now for the branch it's going to be the same technique, so just drawing an outline and then filling it in, but we're going to use a brown, of course. If you have the palette, it's going to be this brown right here, otherwise you can pick your own, that's totally okay, of course. So same thing, just outlining the branch and then filling it in. Okay, I don't know if you can hear that probably, but while I was drawing the outline of the branch, there's a storm that just arrived and it's raining and windy like crazy, so I apologize for the background noises. But yeah, once you have the branch, you can do the same thing with the leaves, both the leaves on the branch and the leaves on the outside of your illustration if you do have them. Now, if you have the palette, the leaves on the branch are going to be this lighter green, which is essentially the same one as the Chameleon, just a little bit less saturated. And the leaves on the outside would be this dark, more blue green. So same thing, we're just drawing the outline and then filling them in to create silhouettes of the leaves. Awesome! So once you have all your silhouettes, we can quickly add some texture and color variation to them, and the way to do it is quite simple. So you're going to create a new layer above your color layer, rename this one to texture, and you're going to tap on it again to apply it as a clipping mask. Now what a clipping mask does is everything we draw on this texture layer is going to stay within the chameleon shape that we have. So we can just pick a different color than our chameleon. In my case, I'm going to go with this light green and a brush that has some texture to it. So it could be still in the sketching panel. So the brush that comes with Procreate, the 6B pencil, making it super, super big. Or if you have the illustration bundle, that could be the basic texture brush. And then you can simply brush over your chameleon, which is going to add some really nice textures. You could, if you want, do the same thing on the branch. I'm personally going to only do it on the chameleon because that's the main focus on the piece. I want the branch to be there, but I don't want it to be too interesting either. We're also going to add some extra color for the belly. So same thing, we're going to create a new layer. We're going to rename this one to belly. We're also going to apply it as a clipping mask so that it stays within the silhouette that we have. And we're going to stick with the same brush, but this time we're going to go with this very, very, very light version of our green, so almost white, but not quite. And we're simply going to brush over the belly part of a chameleon. So yeah, it's really super quick and you don't have to be crazy precise here. We just want to see that, you know, the chameleon is not one solid color. You can also add this color on the eye. I know we called it belly, but it could be nice to just add these stripes on the eye. Again, it just makes the piece feel a bit more refined and fun. And doing that on the other eye as well. speaking of the eye, we should draw the eye, so creating a new layer, applying it as a clipping mask as well, and renaming it to eye. Now the reason I like to create so many different layers as opposed to drawing everything on one is that so if you make a mistake, for example on the belly, if you realize that your line is going weirdly, you can just erase that, and it's not going to erase the texture, the base color, and everything. It's just going to erase the belly. That being said, for the eye, you're just going to pick a super dark green, not quite black. You could go with black if you want, but I rarely use pure black, so that's just a personal preference. And just filling in the eye. And we're almost ready to start shading, but before that, we're going to recolor the outlines around the branch. So for that, you can go on your details layer here, and with 2 fingers, swipe it towards the right. Now that's going to activate alpha lock. If for some reason it doesn't work, you can also just tap on the layer and manually activate it from the menu. Now everything we draw on the details layer is going to stay within the lines that were already there, so that way you can just pick whatever color you want your outlines to be. I'm gonna go with a darker version of my brown, so that was the base one we used. In the color palette, if you want to make it darker, it would be this one. And then just brushing over your outlines. You could also recolor the outlines of the leaves just so it matches the color of the leaf a bit better. So either color picking that and then making it darker, or picking from the color palette, which is going to be this green right here on the right of the base color. And doing the same thing, just brushing over. You can see it's very subtle, but might as well do it. It literally takes, what, 30 seconds? Great, so we're ready to start shading at this stage. And for that, if you're not used to shading, a really quick tip that you might want to do is just create a new layer. You don't need to rename it because it's just a scrap layer. With any brush, any color, just draw your light source, so a circle like this, and then just draw a bunch of rays to help you see, where the light is hitting your character. Now, in terms of actually drawing the shadows and the lights, we're going to go ahead and create a new layer right below the details and above the eye. Rename this one to shadows and apply it as a clipping mask so that it stays within the base silhouette of the chameleon as well. And for the shadows, we're going to use a blending mode. So just tapping on the N next to the check mark and selecting linear burn. You're then going to lower the opacity of that layer around 50%. And I'm not going to go into all the details about blending modes because I do have a full-on video in which I teach you all about them. But using a blending mode is going to allow you to paint all of your shadows using only one color, and that color is going to adapt with the color under it, creating really nice shadows super quickly. Now the color I personally like to use for my shadow is a grayish purple. You could really use whatever you want here. Honestly, the only thing I would recommend is not using a neutral gray because then your shadows are going to be quite muddy. So anything that has a bit of a tint to it is going to work well. But again, I'm going to go with this grayish purple right here. And with the same brush that you used before, so either the 6B pencil or the basic texture brush. And all you have to do to paint your shadows is start from the light source and follow one of the rays until it hits something. So for example, if I follow this ray here, it hits the head, which means the head is going to cast a shadow on the body. So you can just very quickly paint a shadow there. And then you just repeat that, so following the sun rays or the light rays, and adding all your cast shadows that way. So wherever the ray hits a body part, adding a shadow below it. And if your shadows look a little bit intense at this stage, that's totally okay. We're going to play with the opacity of the shadow layer once we have the lights. So for now, just focus on mapping them out, and that's going to be fine. So once you're done with your cast shadows, you might notice that your character still looks flat. It's a little bit better, but it's still, quite flat. And the reason for that is that there's another type of shadow called form shadows. So if we follow the light right here, we can see that there's nothing casting a shadow on the back, but the back is also curving away, which means at one point the light is not going to be able to hit the chameleon anyway, which is going to create a soft shadow. Now, cast shadows tend to be really harsh and defined. The form shadows are going to be much softer and almost kind of creating a gradient on your character. So you can add a bunch of soft shadows on the side of the character that is opposite to the light source. So in my case, that's going to be on the right side of the Chameleon. And if you're struggling creating a nice gradient, don't worry about it for now, just place the shadows and I'm going to show you how you can really quickly and easily blend them. And that should really just take a few seconds, and once you're done placing your shadows, you can hide your light source reference just to make sure that everything is there. And if you do need to blend some of your form shadows, you could use the smudge tool here at the top, setting it to the stucco brush from the painting panel, and just quickly going over to smudge in or blend in your shadows. That might not be necessary for you, your shadows might be totally fine, but that's always an option that you have if you feel the need to. We're also going to add some highlights, so go ahead and create a new layer above the shadows, renaming it to lights and applying it as a clipping mask as well so it stays within the base color. Now for the lights, we're going to use a blending mode called Add. And now Add is very, very strong, so we're going to start with pretty low opacity, probably between 20 and 30%. And you can use, again, any color of your choice for the lights. It's going to blend well with the base. I like to go with a bright orange yellow color just because it makes it look like the sun. Now the way I like to add lights is very simple. I like to just do what I call outlining my outlines. So essentially I'm just adding a thin line of light towards the light source. So my light source here, you could, if you want, reactivate this sketch, but I find it to be a bit more confusing at this stage than anything. But yeah, my light source is here, which means I'm just going to add a thin line of light, outlining my outline. So you can see it's really quite quick, but it does make your character pop so much more, especially if you have a background. And you can go ahead and add some extra highlights like here in the eye, maybe also adding some extra shiny little dots. But yeah, the main idea of this technique is really just to add a thin line of light facing the light source. So I'm going to stop talking to let you focus on adding your highlights. I'm going to keep my video in the background, obviously, so you can use it as a reference. But again, there's really no right or wrong way to do this. So just have fun and experiment. You can also add some highlights on the branch just to make it pop a little bit more. So creating a new layer above the branch layer, renaming it to lights as well, applying it as a clipping mask, using the blending mode Add, lowering the opacity of it quite a lot, probably around 30% once more. And then same thing, just outlining your outlines with a little bit of light. Now, since we're not going to have shadows on the branch, you could go ahead and have your light lines a little bit on the thicker side. And right before we move on to the animation, if you want, you can always go back, like I was saying, to your lights and shadows layer and play with the opacity of them. I feel like my shadows are too intense, so I'm just going to lower the opacity, experiment with a few things here. I think that is good. I like the lights, but I'm actually going to go ahead and add a bit of lights on the back itself, so not just an outline, but really taking my pencil, putting it to the side so it covers a big area. If you don't have an Apple pencil, you could just make your brush bigger. And then softly, very softly painting over the back. Just add a bit of a highlight there because otherwise I felt like it was quite flat. And maybe doing the same thing at the top of the head here as well. Yeah, that's much better. And if you want, you can go back on your eye layer and add a straight up white dot on it because sometimes the highlights are just not strong enough. So picking pure white, same brush but smaller probably, adding a white dot there, that should really bring your character to life. Okay, so we're ready to start animating the colors, and that's going to be quite easy, honestly. The first thing we're going to do is we are going to duplicate the silhouette of the chameleon so that we can use that to change the colors. So open up your chameleon group, duplicate the color layer, and then selecting the bottom one, that's very important, you're going to drag it outside of the group. That's going to cover up the color of your chameleon, which I know right now doesn't seem optimal, but that's totally okay. Next thing you're going to do, look very closely here, you're going to take 2 fingers and you're going to hold them on the belly layer, which is going to select the color of the belly. So if you did it right, you're going to see a bunch of tiny lines kind of moving on your screen, and it's going to open up this selection menu. Now with the selection activated, what you're going to do is you're going to go on your color layer that is outside of the chameleon group, so on top of everything. You're going to tap on that layer and you're going to select clear. That's going to erase all of the section that was the belly off of that color layer. You're going to see why later. Now we're going to do the same thing with the eye layer, so just holding 2 fingers onto it to select the shape, going back on the color layer that is outside of the chameleon group, and clicking on clear to erase the eye. And when that's done, you can just go ahead and collapse your chameleon group. So at this stage, you should have this weird looking color overlay on top of your chameleon. If you hide the group, you just have this kind of weird shape. And that is the shape that we're going to use to create the color animation. So go back and color pick that color that you use for the chameleon. Open up the color menu, and you're just going to shift the hue here towards the right a little bit, which is going to make it still green, but a little bit more blue of a green. So you don't want a big shift, just a tiny shift. And then you're going to drag that color onto your shape. Now that's not bad, but we don't see all the shadows and all the texture. So to see all of the chameleon details, all you have to do is open up the layer panel, and we're going to set this color layer to the blending mode color, which is right at the bottom of the list, second to last. So you can see now that this layer affects the color of the chameleon. So you can probably guess what we're about to do. We're just going to create a bunch of layers with slightly different colors every time, and then we're going to animate that. So simply duplicating your color layer, going back to your color panel and slightly moving the hue cursor so that you end up with a slightly different green, and then dragging that color onto your shape to fill it in. So we're going to repeat this step a bunch of times with slightly different colors every time. Now the more layers you create and the smaller the difference is between the different colors, the more fluid your animation is going to be in the end. So that's totally a personal preference here, how many layers you create and how much different the colors are between the layers. You could have kind of a flashing chameleon or a smooth changing chameleon. I'm going to go with a smooth changing chameleon. So I'm just going to repeat the steps a few times, probably around, honestly, between 12, 15, 20. But again, you could have just 5 layers and have the colors change a lot between them. And that's going to be, really cool as well. So take all the time you need here to recolor your chameleon, and we're going to meet once we have all of the color layers. So once you're done, it should look a little bit like this. You're going to have a bunch of layers going through the different colors of the rainbow. Now to animate that, all you have to do is go in the wrench icon menu here at the top. In the canvas submenu, you can activate animation assist. Now don't freak out if everything disappears, that's totally okay. We just have a few settings to tweak. So the way Procreate works for animation is using the different layers as frames. So just like when you have a flip book, you have a bunch of different little pages, but when you flip through them, it creates an animation. That's what Procreate does, but with our layers. So all we see here is all the different color layers, but since they're applied as the blending mode color, it looks like it's nothing. So all we have to do is tell Procreate that the chameleon base here is actually going to be what is called the background. So it's going to stay still, and that all that needs to move is the color layer. We need them to change. So to set your chameleon as the background, you need to make sure that your chameleon group is right above the background color layer. If there's anything between them, it's not going to work. Now, if your chameleon group is right above the background color, you should be able to go in the animation assist menu here, tapping on that frame, and then activating the background option. So already you should see that, oh, your chameleon just changed color. Now at this stage, you should be able to click play and have all the colors circle through and have a color changing chameleon. Now there are a few settings that you might want to play with, so just tapping on setting, you can go ahead and make sure it is set to loop so that your animation loops through the color really nicely. And then you can play with frames per second, which in this case is going to affect how quickly the colors change. And there's really no right or wrong frame per second here. It's really going to depend on how many layers you have and how much difference there is between the different colors. Actually, I think I'm going to stick with 5. I kind of like it. Now, if you want to export this animation to use it, for example, on social media, there's one last little thing that you need to keep in mind, and that is, if you want to post on Instagram and Facebook, videos need to be at least 3 seconds long. Now, that really shouldn't be a problem in this video because we created a bunch of layers in this animation, but the way to know how long one loop is to simply look at how many layers you have, so how many color layers you have. Don't count the Chameleon layers, really just the color layers. And divide that by how many frames per second you have set in the settings. Now, I don't know how many color layers I have. Let's just say 20 because that's going to be easy to divide. But if I have 20 color layers, I can divide that by how many frames per second I have set it to. So 20 divided by 5 would mean my animation is 4 seconds long. Now, if your animation is not long enough, all you have to do is swipe all of the different colors layer you have. I know it's a bit annoying, but selecting them all, then holding those layers and dragging them onto the screen, which is going to duplicate them. It might take a little bit of time because you might have a lot, but then all you have to do is, while they're still selected, pressing on one of them and dragging that towards the top, which is going to essentially create a copy of your animation. So it's going to be the same frames, but you're just going to have more of them, which is going to lengthen up your animation. And once that is done, you can go in the wrench icon menu, picking the share submenu, and at the very bottom selecting animated MP4, making sure that the frame per second here is the same one you had in your settings. You can then just tap on export, select save video, and it's going to save your animation as a regular video in your camera roll, so you can just use it as you would any other video. Now, if you like this video and want to learn how to create more simple animations in Procreate, I highly recommend you check out this playlist in which I'm going to teach you exactly that. But before you leave, make sure you give this video a like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any of the weekly videos, and click on the link right here, and I'll meet you there.